Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Winnetka Village Council study session for December 10th, 2024. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Ask everybody to mute your electronic devices, and I'll ask Rob to do a roll call for attendance.
Thank you. Trustee Apatow?
Here.
Trustee Orsick?
Here.
Trustee Handler?
Here.
Trustee Dearborn?
Here.
Trustee Albinson?
Here.
Trustee Dahlman?
Here.
President Rintz.
Here. Okay, item 2 is public comment. This is the time of the evening where anybody who wishes may address council on the items, on any item that's not in the agenda. So if you got something on your mind that has nothing to do with energy, then you're welcome to come up to the podium and share your thoughts now. Come on up, King. Oh,
Just yawning, waving.
I figured you were part of the deal, but it's not uncommon for people to take a couple bites at the apple here, so. All right, seeing that there's nobody coming to the podium, we'll close public comment and move forward. Item 3 is the IMEA contract renewal follow-up. This is the Winnetka Future Energy Supply Considerations. During the October Future Energy Forum, Mark Pruitt, former director of the Illinois Power Agency and current principal for the Power Bureau, gave a presentation about power purchasing in the PJM transmission area. Given the complexity of this topic and the time constraints of the forum, he was requested to provide a more in-depth presentation to Village Council and to provide a conceptual overview of potential energy options here in Winnetka. Water and Electric Director Nick Narhi is going to go ahead and introduce, and we'll move forward.
Can you hear me?
Nick?
So I have the pleasure of introducing Mr. Mark Pruitt tonight. Mark Pruitt has more than 30 years of experience in the Illinois energy sector. Since 2011, Mark has served as an independent energy consultant, serving clients including Argonne National Laboratory, the Illinois Senate, independent power producers, and public power providers. Mark served as the first director for the Illinois Power Agency, where he secured electricity supply on behalf of approximately 4.7 million residential and small commercial customers served by ComEd and Ameren. Mark also serves as the adjunct associate professor in the Master of Science in Energy and Sustainability program at Northwestern University, where he currently teaches courses related to energy, markets, policy, and regulation. With that, I'll let Mark take it away.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you for the introduction and the invitation. Full disclosure, Nick and I have a past. Nick was a student in the master's program at University of Illinois at Chicago, a master's of engineering program, and I taught a course there for my friend, or with my friend, Bill Ryan, and Nick was the best one in his row. He was really good.
Was it a short row?
It's pre-COVID, it's hard to remember. But thank you all very much for the invitation. I want to first just make the council members aware, the trustees aware of the level of commitment and assistance and guidance and good feedback I've received from your staff. This is not an easy set of tasks. It's not easy for me, it's not easy for very many people, and they put a lot of effort in and given me good guidance. So thanks to them, and thanks to you for the work that you're willing to put in here. I have 3 kids, and my youngest is still in the area, and she asked what I was doing this evening, and I said, well, I'm going to talk to a municipal board. And she said, where do you keep finding these victims? You know, they've heard about this for now 30 years. So I'm not going to try to make you experts. Here's my advice to you. This is very general information. I think that the highest and best use of this time is for me to give you some landscape, some high points on the landscape, so you can orient yourself around the main issues to see how the bigger pieces fit together. We're going to get into quite a bit of detail, but if the detail gets a little overwhelming, don't worry. We'll have time for questions and responses later. How would you all like to handle questions? You want to fire them out as we go or to hold them until later?
Write your questions down, let's hold them to the end, and then we'll go through
Great. Very good. So let's begin. We'll start by turning on the device. And here we go. So we've done introductions. We're going to do some background. Then we'll talk about our grid supply options. And then we'll have opportunities for discussion. There are appendices or an appendix at the end. Those are all of the slides that are, we might talk about it, we might not. Everything is important, but it's not always important right now. So we might not touch on all of these things. I have expressed to staff that I'm willing to take whatever questions that come up after this evening. Happy to provide written responses for use for those around the table or for your public-facing activities. So you let me know what you want, and it's yours. I'm not going to dwell on my background. You've heard about it. I'm a consultant. I was invited to leave state government about 12 years ago. I led a small agency that was responsible for negotiating power supply for Commonwealth Edison and Ameren, Illinois' small commercial and residential customers. I was also responsible for negotiating the Renewable Portfolio Standard and the Energy Efficiency Portfolio Standard in the state. So lots of moving parts there. Before that, I worked at the University of Illinois, where I managed natural gas and electricity purchasing for the state facilities statewide. So I'm a transactions person. I'm not an engineer. I've worked with engineers, about 50-50, engineers and attorneys, most of my career. And, you know, the energy business has been in a lot of flux, but I started at a very good time in the early 2000s in Illinois, and anywhere from power production at Nicor Solutions through University of Illinois and then the Power Agency. And you heard about the teaching stuff, so we'll just move on to the important things. So I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell you, then I'll tell you what I plan to tell you, then I'll tell you what I told you. The current market has some primary variables that you need to pay attention to. And this is writ large, right? Think beyond your borders. Think about beyond Illinois. Think about the region, right? The first thing that is really different in the current market is we have growing demand for energy. That's not been the case for at least the past 10 years, right? So things move very slowly in the energy business. So a change in a 10-year trend is kind of a big deal. This is coming from data centers. It's coming from electric vehicles. It's coming from the electrify everything policy that's here and at the local level, state level, and national level. At the same time, we are losing the capacity or the ability to meet that electrical demand. That's through the retirement of existing power plants, either due to economic variables or due to policy, right? Doesn't matter why they left, they just are leaving. They're closing down. Illinois, as an example, northern Illinois especially, used to generate 50% more electricity than what it used. That's going to actually fall towards more of an import position in future years. Just gives you a sense of the change in the gradation. There are two important concepts to think about in the current market. Two words, capacity and supply. Capacity is the ability to meet the peak demand. Think about the hottest summer afternoon. It's still outside, everyone's air conditioning is operating, and power supply is at its maximum. We need a power supply system that can meet and exceed that demand to maintain grid stability, right? The grid only operates if you have more supply than demand. If you don't have that imbalance, we call you Texas, okay? So that's capacity. That's the ability to max out. That is different than supply. Supply is the amount of kilowatt hours that you consume over a period of time, usually days, months, or years. So It's hard to remember that, but those are the two vocabulary words that I would assign to you, that just when you hear these words, they have very separate and distinct meanings. One is, can we meet the peak demand? And the other is, can we always match that supply on an hour-by-hour basis moving forward? That's the current market. That's challenging. The outlook is, based on this current market, rising prices for capacity. It costs money to keep a power plant open and ready to operate, even if it's not operating. We have a number of power plants in Illinois that operate all the time. Those are the nuclear power plants. They're powerhouses, right? They do a lot of work and they're steady state, but they cannot load follow, meaning that they can't cycle up and down. They are either on or they're off. We have a number of resources in this state, wind and solar, that only operate when there is wind and solar, right? That's predictable, but it's not steady. And that generation does not always happen at the same time when we need the electricity. That's a challenge. In the middle is load following. This is the traditionally gas and coal, but now becoming more battery driven, where if we need it, it starts up. If we don't need it, it shuts down. And those plants are the plants that are most critical to this rising capacity price trend, insofar as we need a natural gas plant to be available to turn on so that we can meet our capacity needs, even if it only operates 40 hours in the year. Right? So think about that. Another way of thinking about capacity is close to where I grew up in Schaumburg, which is German for near the mall. I'm going to use the mall as an example. Think about Woodfield Mall's parking lot. Think about the acres and acres and acres. They don't need all of that on September 3rd. They need it on Black Friday, right? That maximum capacity is what they need. They still have to pay to pave it in September. They have to clean it. They have to fix it and maintain it and patrol it. All those costs keep on going, even if they're not using it. Same thing for capacity. We need those power plants to meet our maximum demand. So capacity prices, capacity payments are made to all of these assets. So if you have rising demand and falling capacity, this is a market-based pricing mechanism set by an auction. So when you reduce supply and raise demand, you get higher prices. That's going to happen for all the ComEd customers starting in June of this next year. The capacity cost for just one component of energy in Northern Illinois is going to increase by $1.9 billion because of this tightening balance between supply and demand. Now, your residents aren't necessarily going to see all of that because you are hedged. You have a separate type of a system, but for those hedged contracts, you would be exposed to those cost increases. Okay? The second thing that you're going to notice, and just having lived long enough and can still remember things, the second thing I remember in the past when this has happened, and we're seeing it now, is greater volatility. The price of energy changes every hour. Again, it's based on auctions, right? We're starting to see volatility in pricing that is 2 to 3 times greater than the average over the past 8 years. That means that there is shortage, right? There's tightening supply, and that will translate into higher energy costs, because your cost of energy is not just the cost to make the energy, it's also, there's also a risk premium built into that, price insurance. I need to buy it today so I can lay claim to that energy tomorrow, right? For that privilege, I'm going to be charged a premium, just like car insurance, right? And lastly is reliability, and this is the most important issue, and we'll see some data around this, that to the extent you are losing capacity against growing supply, technically your grid becomes less stable. So no matter what purchasing agreement you have in place, doesn't matter. The electrons have to be put onto the grid at the right time. And if you can't do that, you start to have reliability issues. And that's technically what happened in Texas. And I know we pick on Texas, but, you know, they had it coming. So here is some data provided by your staff, and all that they've done here is stacked up, you know, the amount, your demand from your municipal utility changes hour by hour, technically minute by minute. But instead of showing that longitudinally, you know, hour 1, hour 2, hour 3, day 1, day 2, day 3, they restacked this to say, okay, how many hours, all the way over on the left, you know, did we need 39,000 kilowatts? Well, there was 1 hour when that was necessary. That's all the way over on the left. And then they said, okay, how many hours did we need? I don't know, call it 38,850 kilowatts. And there's a few more hours that needed that. And then on down the line, and you see over on the right-hand side in the block, the number of days that needed certain levels of electricity. And this is called a load curve, right? And it gives you a sense of what is your capacity requirement. Your capacity requirement is that high point on the graph all the way over to the left. So every hour of the day, for every day of the year, you need at least this amount of electricity all the way over on the right. A few hours of the year, you need electricity all the way up here on the left. Again, your capacity is 39,000 kWh. Over the course of the year is about 121,000 kilowatt hours. So how does all this happen? Well, this is, you know, highfalutin talk, but these energy systems are interconnected. Your system bumps up against ComEd's, ComEd's bumps up against Ameren's, Ameren's bumps up against NIPSCO in northern Indiana and the like. Over time, each of those utilities, which was called a balancing authority, had responsibility for always balancing supply and demand on their own. As their systems grew to abut one another, they found that it was far more efficient for them to share that responsibility, to say, well, you've got a power plant over there that you're only using 60% of the time. How about you operate that 100% of the time, and we'll buy that excess electricity that your people don't need. We'll bring it over here through transmission, and you'll get greater efficiency from that power plant. We won't have to build a new power plant. We'll share the resource. That's what this map shows. Every contiguous line here are utilities, or colors. These are utilities that are connected by wires. So you see in northern Illinois, there's this little island of blue, that's Commonwealth Edison. You see the rest of the blue states off to the right, that's PJM interconnection. That was originally Pennsylvania, Jersey, Maryland. And ComEd can be out here and physically separate from all the other PJM states because of high voltage transmission. We have great big wires going from northern Illinois all the way over into Ohio and Indiana. And that's why they can share and move power across their geography. Southern Illinois is part of what's called MISO, which is this upper Midwestern region in green. This is Illinois, and all of the assets, the generating and transmission assets that serve northern Illinois. If it's a blue line, that is a transmission line. If it's a dot, that's a power plant. It could be a wind farm, could be a coal plant, could be a nuclear plant. But as you see, there are some assets in central southern Illinois that are not technically in PJM's footprint, but they're connected by transmission lines. So the Powerton power plant down in Peoria, where I went to school, actually moves most of its power to northern Illinois. Okay? So lots of complex engineering went on to create this, and this is largely a result of expansion in power generating as an industry in Illinois over decades. So you can't have a consultant without having a fancy graph. This is a fancy graph showing the PJM supply and demand. Let's look at the right-hand side, the tie-dye side, that shows these bumpy, lumpy ribbons that stack on to top of each other. Each of those ribbons represents the hourly demand for each of the utilities, color-coded down here at the bottom, that are part of PJM. So they all aggregate and stack up to this top line, which is the peak demand that needs to be met by the PJM system of power plants and transmission over the period of time. On the left is the hourly output of all the power assets that make up the PJM system. And you notice that they're not, well, nuclear is pretty steady state in the red line here, but everything else moves around. The wind and solar move around, hydro moves around, and up here at the top, you've got a blue line that moves around quite a bit, and then you've got this brown line or black line in the middle that moves a little bit, but is trending up and to the right. That's coal. So blue is natural gas, coal is black. Take a look at this. Take a look at the top line of the natural gas and see how closely it matches the pattern of the top line of demand within the entire PJM footprint. That means that natural gas is balancing on an hour-by-hour basis. So nuclear generates, wind and solar generates, and then natural gas power plants cycle up and down to as closely match as possible that electricity to match the level of demand. So this dispatchability is really critical. Coal, natural gas, nuclear to some extent, batteries, and petroleum assets are called dispatchable because they can be turned on and off on demand. And that's how we managed the grid for decades. We knew that demand changes hour by hour, so we would cycle up and cycle down these dispatchable assets to match that demand, right? Now we have variable rate assets. So now we're trying to match variable demand with variable supply. So juggling, essentially. And it just makes this a bit more of a challenge for the grid operator. Part of the challenge is that, as you know, with solar or wind and hydro, you can't turn it on, you can't turn it off. So you have what's called an effective load carrying capability for every type of resource. And that just means how much of this resource can we expect to show up on that hot summer day or that cold winter night? And this is kind of a discounting factor. I just highlighted up here at the top for solar that's tracking. That means it's a solar panel on an arm that moves and follows the sun, right? So in this year, that's expected to be about 11%. If you go out to the right, in the future, PJM's expecting those types of assets to be less contributing to peak demand in PJM. And that's because as you get more solar in the PJM system, almost all that solar operates on an identical schedule. So if you have a lot of solar showing up at 2 p.m. in the afternoon, that's great for 2 p.m. in the afternoon, but that doesn't help you at 6 o'clock in the evening, right? So this is something that California has experienced. They solved their middle of the day problem, but now they still have this very large problem at the end of the day. So they need a different type of resource to help them at the end of the day. If you drop down and look into the dispatchable assets in red, so natural gas has 79% ELCC. That just means that it's pretty reliable. Yes, sometimes gas plants are out for maintenance. Yes, sometimes gas plants don't operate for mechanical breakdown or the fuel freezes. That happens, and that is all encapsulated in here. So the whole game for PJM is portfolio management. They need a broad range of generation that serve as tools. When I need a 3/8-inch crescent wrench, I need a 3/8-inch crescent wrench. I can have a pair of pliers. I can have all these different tools in my toolbox to meet my hourly demand. And that's what they're doing right now and every day. This is a moment-by-moment, hour-by-hour activity managed by PJM. So this gets to the reliability. As PJM sees more retirements of nuclear, coal, natural gas, and dispatchable assets, and greater entry of variable rate assets, the average capacity of that entire system, its maximum manageable, dispatchable output starts to fall because you're getting a greater concentration of variable assets and a lower concentration of dispatchable assets. So PJM has run some assessments, and they said, all right, we're going to measure our reliability based on reserve margin. Reserve margin is the excess capacity above and beyond our projected demand that we need to make sure that we can keep the lights on. So, you know, belt and suspenders, right? What's the ability to make sure that we always have enough? They then said, let's measure reserve margin with a low new entry scenario. That means that we don't have a lot of new capacity coming online. That's the low new entry bar you see here. And let's compare that, our generating capacity excess, right, our cushion, against our load forecast. This is the 2023 load forecast that starts at 23%. So 23% excess capacity, that's pretty reliable. If we anticipate high levels of electrification, so lots of EVs, lots of electric heating instead of natural gas heating and the like, also about 23, 22%. They're saying if we don't get a lot of new capacity coming into PJM, that cushion starts to shrink. And by 2030, you're down in single digits. That's not a lot of extra, right? So your grid becomes a bit more risky. They ran a separate scenario called the high new energy scenario. That's assuming everything that gets proposed gets built. And they ran against the same demand forecasts, 2023 and the high electrification. And we see that it's a bit better, especially out in the follow trailer years, 2030, 15% and 12%. Not bad, but not quite as robust as what we've seen in the past. My read of various data from Department of Energy indicates that the high new entry scenario is not likely. Only about 15% of all power projects proposed in PJM over the past 10 years have actually been built. So the batting average is really low. So the truth is probably somewhere in between, but it's getting less reliable. That's the takeaway. And that's not just Mark Pruitt or PJM saying this. Your Commerce Commission in Illinois started, and you can find the footnote here. It's a hot link down at the bottom in the soft version of the document. The Renewable Energy Access Plan. Staff identified in the bars here the generating capacity of various fuels listed out here on the right, and then the reserve margin that is expected to need to be met in northern Illinois in the red dashes. And you see that for a number of years, you've got more generating capacity than the red dashes, and that's great. But even with the ICC, they see the same pattern where capacity retirements here, the future years off to the right, show a decline, and that's with the retirement of coal and natural gas and the relatively slow adoption of solar and wind as replacement capacity. Now, we do see large wind and solar projects. The problem is, remember, that they don't have an effective load carrying capacity. So if you lose 2,000 megawatts, or use round numbers, if you lose 1,000 megawatts of natural gas generation, to replace that with solar, you would need 20 times that to come up with the same effective amount of capacity in the PJM market, 20x. So you got to build a lot of this stuff, and the challenges of development we can get into if you'd like, but that's a really tall order. So what's the implication here? Okay, Mark, you convinced me. We've got declining resources, we've got increasing demand, we're in a pinch. What does this do for pricing? Well, ComEd posted their forward view of incremental increases in electric supply costs and then ComEd system costs for now through 2050. And of course, that goes up. But they ran two scenarios, one for moderate electrification, one for high electrification. And in the electric supply costs, they break out the variable cost of fuel and O&M and renewable energy credits, right? The actual kind of cost of all the balancing that comes along from running the generation. But you see how the generation cost goes up? That's the dark blue in there. That's because you need to buy so much more of the renewable assets to replace the retiring dispatchable assets. Similarly, down here on the ComEd system cost, this is the cost of moving that power from the regional grid to a customer's account. Those costs go up as well because now ComEd needs to have a more robust system to handle not only rooftop solar and locally located rooftop solar and other systems, but they need to have more local points of interconnection with the transmission system to be able to increase their points of entry for additional electricity. So that if you're going to go into, if you got kids going into engineering, they're going to be very busy in Illinois over the next 30 years. That's the good news. So I'm going to go back to where I started. Got growing demand, falling capacity, and more variable supply. And that's just going to lead to rising capacity costs, greater price volatility, and an erosion, maybe that's the best term, on reliability for the regional grid. Moving on to grid supply options. So all of that was to give you some context. So now let's talk more specifically about operating a municipal utility. So a municipal utility can be its own balancing authority. If it wants to be a balancing authority that operates within the context of PJM, right, that regional grid to get the benefits of access to that transmission, all those power plants and price discovery, all those things, you need to operate like all the other PJM members. And I am not going to read through all this, okay? But it is very involved. You need to spend, or one would need to spend, a lot of time on resource planning, right? Somebody has to plan year by year, decade by decade, to identify what is the trend of our load growth. Is it changing hour by hour or seasonally? What is going to be the cost of securing that capacity and energy in the wholesale market based on current projections? So it's like you need to have a portfolio manager, essentially, doing a lot of analysis. I did this at the agency, right? That was my job. Then you need to build out a hedging and procurement strategy to go and secure that capacity and electricity in a manner that's recognizable to PJM. And there are, I don't know, Brian, I thought there were 24 manuals in PJM, and I think 12 of them have to do with the kind of the hedging and procurement and market operations. So it's a pretty involved process in and of itself. Then there's legal and compliance. This is a heavy, heavy lift because you're not just dealing with your procurement contracts, you're also dealing with PJM and FERC as well as state statute, right? Again, I'm not trying to make it scary. It's just, it's a lot to be able to do this. And then lastly is operations and engineering. So once you've got all the paper and planning and legal covered, then you actually have to do it, right? You have to monitor your system 24 hours a day. You're obligated to do that as a PJM entity. You have to have a staffed desk watching the monitor and being available to take emergency action if there's a drop in voltage, if there's a surge. The reporting requirements are fairly significant. I took a guess based on some work I've done with some universities who want to do this. I'm guessing about 24 individual experts would be necessary here, aside from linemen, meter readers, and that. So this is just kind of the interacting with PJM type stuff. I think you can maybe get it skinny down to 8 FTEs equivalent, but I think you're probably going to need to be above that. That's the absolute bare minimum. And those people would have to be rock stars to get it all done. So it's a big deal, right? But reliability is everything. You know, I know that in the energy business we talk a lot about emissions and we talk about price, but at base the entire PJM system is built on reliability. And that's why all of these things have to happen. at the right time in the right way. So when I was asked to take a look at the options for the municipality, we came up with a range of options. There may be others, and maybe even more could come about in the future. But we tried to narrow them down so that we had something manageable to get our arms around. And these are laid out here. Under the option is the title of what we called them. We tried to carry that through to the following analysis. Then the description of what those mean. The viability, meaning how easy or likely is this to actually work from my perspective. That's my opinion. And then comments. This might be something that we come back to as a reference, but let me just give you the quick rundown here. Some have said, well, let's just have the Illinois Power Agency take care of our supply purchasing. I'm pretty familiar with the statute. The statute doesn't allow the IPA to contract out with anybody. They are there as a creature to stand as an intermediary between the investor-owned utilities and the wholesale power market. They don't do what you need done. Others have said, well, how about Commonwealth Edison do it for us? Okay, that could happen, but in essence, you would have to surrender your municipality. ComEd can't just come in and say, well, we'll just sub this out to us and we'll take care of it. They're not allowed to do that under the Public Utility Act, and you can see the hot link there. Additionally, something to consider is that if your residents were to be served by Commonwealth Edison, each of those residents would have to make their own supply decision. I'll just say that again. Instead of your village operating in an aggregated demand where you say, hey, we've got 39,000 kW of demand, we can go make some things happen in this market, that goes away. ComEd customers are on their own. That's an element of the Electric Choice Law of 1997, right? Now, municipalities can put together an aggregation program, but all they can really do is do what the IPA does and broker a transaction. They can't make long-term commitments, they can't issue debt, and if you can't do either of those, you're not a creditworthy entity, and if you're not creditworthy, you can't do long-term power contracts. That's just how it is arranged right now. We said, well, what about a power marketer? Maybe we can go and talk to, Constellation New Energy. Could they do it for us? Well, yeah, they could do some of those functions for you, but it's probably not a good idea to have, a commercial power marketer making legal decisions for you, right? So there'd have to be still a high level of oversight. They can place power for you, they can do scheduling, but a lot of those other functions, from a liability standpoint, you would likely want to keep them in-house. Then comes a joint action agency. Could you replace IMEA with a new organization? Yes, you could. The most recent examples of joint action agencies that I've seen are some water agencies proposed in the south suburbs. And those discussions seem to have taken a fair amount of time. So I would say that while this is technically feasible, you have to have a lot of agreement amongst a certain number of willing parties and an ability to move forward quickly because, years bleed into next year and then the next year. And, if you're going to take, people ask me, well, Mark, when was the best time for us to have started our planning? And I said, well, 10 years ago. What's the second best time? Today. But if you're going to do a joint action agency, you may be, a couple years distant before you can get everything in line to be able to make your plan. You could go it alone. Absolutely. There are some standalone utilities and cooperatives that operate. I've worked with them myself. You can absolutely do it, but it comes at a cost. And you have to be very committed to doing this because it's a lot of work. And I'm not afraid of work, but it's work plus liability. And I think that just as all those small utilities early in the century managed their affairs separately, but once they had an opportunity to share resources and the like, boy, they gravitated to that really quick. because going alone can be a real challenge. And then the IMEA extension. And we took a look, and it was shared with me the agreement, and of course that's an option as well. So we'll discuss these in a little bit of detail. I, again, am not going to read everything to you, but these are how I assessed it, right? So this is my balanced scorecard. Excuse me for a moment. My balanced scorecard says, okay, I'm interested in overall cost, and we're talking about primarily cost of energy supply. I'm interested in, could your strategy give you access to existing portfolios, longer short-term hedges, and is there a low enough overhead to manage your transactions, right? So if you're going to purchase something, it's not just the thing you purchased, it's all the costs that come into getting that procurement completed, right? So that's legal, procurement, negotiating, et cetera. I want to know, okay, what is the capability? This is a moving market. If you're going to operate smartly, you've got to have someone pretty savvy running the show. You need somebody who knows how the market operates. So under capability, we want to know, is there an awareness of the market opportunities and then the financial capacity to execute? Because sometimes these opportunities need to be acted on because things are moving, right? That wind farm might be bought by Amazon. That happens, right? I want to know about governance. How easy or difficult is it going to be to present topics for decisions and then to get a decision completed in a stable way? Some people think, oh, well, we'll just have a manager, let the manager sign off. I've seen a number of circumstances where a board approval is required for a lot of transactions, and it cannot be deemed to a manager. I want to know about time horizon. Do you have the authority and ability to commit to deliveries over 10 to 20 years, energy deliveries? Do you have the authority to sign a contract today that might not start for 5 to 10 years? Right? Those are the types of portfolio tools you're going to need to build your portfolio of supply. Then it's the scale. Can you are you large enough to get the attention of suppliers in the market? If you're too small, you're too small. Right? It's just how it works. The minimum contracts I see in capacity are for 50 megawatts. You're at 39 megawatts, right? So that's going to be a struggle going it alone. And then independence. What is the ability of the municipality to operate and guide its own destiny, right? And this is why, you know, I don't ever know that there's necessarily solutions. I know that there's trade-offs. So what we try to do is identify some of these trade-offs for you and lay them out in a succinct fashion. I'm just going to poll the group. Did this rubric make sense? Happy to replace and swap things out. I'm looking at them from an equal weighting standpoint. Some of these might be more important to you than others. So quickly, I broke out the solo approaches, which are, you know, getting a power marketer or going it alone, separate from group approaches, which is going to ComEd, a joint action agency, or IMEA. And just let me quickly give you a Cliff's Notes version on this. So under the power marketer approach, cost. I gave it a middling rating because a power marketer isn't going to be able to go find cheap electricity for you. They're going to be able to secure electricity at today's rate, right? Maybe you can get some good hedges in, and maybe you can get ahead of the market, but you're not going to see a savings. Capability, again, middling. There's some very good suppliers out there, very good, but they can't execute on your behalf. You still need to give them the guidance as to what it is you're looking for and how you want it done. Governance, again, kind of middling. They can execute only on those things that you approve, which is good. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying you're kind of on par value there. For the horizon, most power marketers don't go beyond 5 years in terms of the supply contracts that they negotiate. It's a question of liquidity and credit worthiness. They are going to only enter into or secure contracts for you that the suppliers are satisfied that you are credit worthy. Credit worthiness is not just your rating, it's your size, it's your scalability, it's a number of different variables. Your scale is going to be low because they're just going to represent you. They're not going to pool you with other buyers. They handle you as a discrete customer. And then independence. You can call all the shots here. That's the good news, right? You can do what you want to do as long as you can operate within these prior constraints, right? Go it alone. Cost, I think it's going to be a burden. I'm happy to give you an estimate. I have not given an estimate in terms of what I think it would cost to staff a go-it-alone approach. So I don't have that exact number, but I know that directionally it's a big number, just having done some hiring. Your capability, you're going to rely on who you have in-house. And I'm not saying you're not capable, but it's a great big industry, and it might take some ramp-up time to get to the point where you can identify and act on the opportunities. Governance, it's going to be a drag on you. It's going to be many more meetings. Your time horizon, still going to be about the same. You're not going to be in a position to demand long-term contracts. Your scale is still low, but you maintain your independence. That's great. Moving over to ComEd, cost is a negative. I think your residents are going to see an increase. They would be exposed to those higher ComEd costs, and there's nothing they can really do about it, right? They can mitigate them to some extent through efficiency or on-site generation, but all those costs, delivery as well as energy through ComEd, are going up. Capability, middling. If you've got some really aggressive and informed consumers, they can go and do some really interesting things in the market, but it's going to be up to them, right? I don't know how much of a role the Winnetka community can have in those individual transactions. There's governance, right? You're going to have to go through some motions to transfer your system. You know, I understand there's a code consideration around that due to a referendum, so that's going to take some work. The horizon is very short. For individual consumers buying through ComEd, I'm surprised that very many have more than, say, 2-year price contracts. You can't build new stuff on 2-year contracts, right? It just doesn't happen. Large-scale projects. Scale, small, and then independence is moderate. Basically, the municipality would be out of the picture. Might be supportive, might do some municipal aggregation, but those are limited authorities. All the responsibility shifts over to your consumers in the ComEd model. Joint Action Agency, I think you can see how some of these things look. Cost, you've got some startup costs. Capabilities, again, it depends on who your friends and neighbors in the club are. The governance, it's going to be not just you making a decision, it's everyone else. The horizon, it's going to be a little bit better because you're going to have more scale, right? More members gets more scale. And then your independence, you're going to have some give and take with your Joint Action Agency members. And then IMEA, and these are not thumbs up in green, these are just indicative, right? These have different costs and different preferences. From a cost standpoint, IMEA is still pay-as-you-go. Additionally, after 2035, your cost for electricity actually goes down after your cost of financing the Prairie State bond issuance expires. So your net cost goes down. That's part of the equation that I think you're going to need to consider. Capabilities, I've worked with and around IMEA. They're pretty sharp cats. They are in the market every day. Their governance, I think, is pretty good. You'll have to ask Brian in terms of how, the meetings go, but there are rules in place. There are contracts in place. They have counsel in place. That's all helpful. Their time horizon are pretty good. They can make long-term contracts. They've demonstrated that ability. And then scale, that's pretty good. They have more, I think, more scale today than they've had, say 20 years ago when they started. So they've had some growth, and that growth is actually within your PJM territory, which I think is helpful. And then your independence. Again, you got to get along with the group. The larger the group, the more you sacrifice, right? So that's a reality. The rest of these are more drill downs, and I'm not going to spend time drilling down into each of these. These are more reference and homework materials for you. But I will just comment on a few things. On Go It Alone, especially down here in the horizon, I just want to make a note that I think it's probably 2+ years to be able to establish a Go It Alone strategy. Just having worked with large corporate public sector clients, it takes a lot of alignment, especially on the governance side, to get things aligned. So that's the one thing I would say is, from an immediate consideration standpoint, that's what I would look at with this option. The power marketer, I think that what you need to understand there is that they can help you with your transaction, but they're not going to go and buy some secret cheap electricity for you. They're just passing through what the market gives you, right? They'll manage the transaction. They might advise you, but they're not going to save you money. Commonwealth Edison, again, I think the major issue here, this might be a sleeper issue, is just understanding that going this route really puts all your residents out on their own. And I know you've got a very sophisticated population here. I'm not saying they can't handle it. I'm just saying your ability to say, we would like to follow a policy that goes this direction becomes much more difficult if you're not controlling the wires and the purchase of the electricity. If everybody gets to do what they want, then you get choice, and they might not choose what you're offering. The Joint Action Agency, again, I just think that the scale is something to look at here. Could you make this work with 3 Winnetkas or 5 Winnetkas or 10 Winnetkas, right? I think the scale is really, you need to look at that. You probably want to pinpoint probably somewhere around 100 megawatts of peak demand before this becomes viable to operate in the market, right? So you need at least 3 Winnetkas to make this work. And then on the IMEA agreement, the thing that struck me in reading the agreement is down here on the independence side, where the member-directed resources, 10% of your purchases, can begin prior to 2035. The prior to 2035 I thought was interesting. The other thing that I thought was interesting is that renewable energy credits and carbon offset purchases they do not appear. This is a legal question, so I'd leave it to learned counsel. I don't believe that those are covered in the agreement. There's prohibitions against purchasing energy from other resources, but RECs and carbon offsets are not other energy. And there are transactions that can be based on renewable energy credits or carbon offsets that can be used to finance additional or new renewable energy projects. But that's a nuance, that's a ripple. But I think these might open the door if there's an appetite for those types of projects by the community. You want to learn about renewable energy? Do we have time? Yeah. Okay. So, renewable energy or carbon credits, also called RECs. So, if you hear people say, I'm 100% renewable, right? Anheuser-Busch famously at the Super Bowl a couple years ago, they had, the beer trucks driving through the grain fields, and they had the great big wind farms in the background, and they said, Anheuser-Busch, 100% green. Well, that's great. They were able to say they were 100% green, not because their brewery was located and connected to those wind farms. They were able to say they were 100% green because they purchased the renewable energy credits from wind farms. Okay, so a renewable energy credit is a piece of paper. It's a receipt. It says that 1,000 kilowatt hours of electricity was delivered to the grid at some point in time. It represents the greenness of the energy. So when a wind farm generates electricity, it also generates a renewable energy credit. If I buy that renewable energy credit, and then I buy electricity from the grid, and I put them together, I have green energy. Right? It's a paper transaction. It's a receipt. In my younger years, when I was a little bit more rude, I called it an indulgence. Right? But you get the idea. It's a way to get away from having to generate that renewable energy right at the point at where it is consumed, right? That's challenging. If I can generate it over there and claim the credit over here, that's what that REC allows me to do. Same with carbon credits. So if you purchase a credit, you can purchase it a couple different ways. You can purchase it bundled, where you say, I'm going to have a contract where we buy the REC plus the power, or I can buy it unbundled. Right, just buy the REC. Okay, and this is where Anheuser-Busch got into a little bit of trouble. They bought unbundled RECs. They have most of their operations in St. Louis. The renewable energy credits that they purchased were from North Dakota, and people said, wait a minute. You're not even in the same wholesale market. How is this green, right? So you need to, seek the advice of people who are knowledgeable in this market to make sure that you're not greenwashing, right? That's a term that it pops up every now and then. But I can tell you, I work with data centers that are buying bundled credits, and they're financing, through the strength of those contracts, they're financing new wind and solar farms. They're not at the data center. They're in the same wholesale region, and for their sustainability goals, that's sufficient. So moving down to the next level, if anyone says they're buying 100% renewable, that means one of two things. One is that they've got enough solar and wind on site that's piping into their home or business that covers 100% of their load. They're never drawing from the grid. They are off the grid. Right? That's true 100% green. What I think most people are saying is, I'm still getting my power from the grid because I like the lights to turn on and off when I flip the switch, and I'm going to support green energy development by purchasing these renewable energy credits. That's what they're really saying. This is an accounting or a paper transaction as opposed to a physical power transaction. And then additionality is another term that's very potent in the market today. It says people who want or have a sensitivity towards sustainability, they want to see more solar, more wind, more geothermal, a lot of these non-emitting resources. So they say, if we're going to buy these credits, let's buy them in a way that promotes the development of those types of new assets. Let's not just buy from the existing assets. Let's enter into make a longer-term commitment so that our cash flow supports the development process to bring these new assets into being. So that's my quick primer on renewable energy. I think I'm at time. I probably went a little long. The conclusions are, you have an asset, right? You have an asset that operates within a larger market. That market is going to enter into a period of volatility. You can manage that volatility through a variety of means. We ran through a number of them. The idea is, how do you make the trade-offs that are best for all the investments that you've made over the years? Do you give this up and walk away? Do you bring in new partners? Do you try to optimize with your current partners? So, I think you have good options here. I don't know that there's one that stands out above all the others. It really comes down to, what are you trying to accomplish, which is always the first question that I ask a consulting customer. What do you want? If it's lower price, if it's greater sustainability, if it's greater reliability, those are all things that can be delivered in different configurations. So with that, good luck. I think it's a great opportunity, and I'll be watching.
I'm sorry, thank you.
I
Questions? Go
I
ahead.
have a question. I don't know if it's a dumb question. I understand the comment about how we would have to get new infrastructure and whatnot, but you keep saying that an individual contracts with ComEd.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just used to, back when I had ComEd, I just got a bill in the mail, and my only contracting would be if I turned lights on a lot or off a lot. Are people negotiating contracts, or by that do you mean just how much energy they're using?
Well, in the context of what I was mentioning, it's choosing their own supplier. So in 1997, the Electric Choice Act was passed in Illinois, and that took ComEd out of the power plant business. So ComEd is what we call a wires company.
Oh, I get it.
Well, is this when we're getting
I get it.
spam phone calls
Yep.
trying to get us to?
I get it.
And I can just quickly say, nope, I don't have ComEd. Click.
And,
Which
and
is-
yeah.
So that's what that is.
That's exactly
Okay.
what that is. So if you go on the Illinois Commerce Commission website and you go to the electricity section, you can go to customer choice and they'll show you offers. I think they're up to 60 different price offers from different suppliers that will give you a beach blanket and a ball and a $50 gift card if you sign up with them today for 12 months. And, they're marketing. They're not doing anything wrong. That's the business that they're in. But that's what I'm talking about is in the ComEd context, if you're a ComEd customer and you do nothing, I'm talking about a resident. If you're a resident and you do nothing, you get the ComEd default rate, and that changes every month a little bit, and then more major changes on an annual basis based on what my former agency secures for ComEd, right? Or you can purchase from one of those retail energy suppliers, or an Aries is what they're called, and ComEd will still deliver to you, and the price you pay is based on the contract that you enter into with that retail energy supplier. If you are a larger user, above 100 kW, so if you're larger than a McDonald's, you can't get that fixed price offer. You are on hourly energy pricing if you don't get a supplier. So that means your price could be 2 cents a kilowatt hour at 2 in the morning, could be 40 cents a kilowatt hour in the middle of the afternoon. So that's very different than what your residents have now. They get their bill, they probably don't like it, but no one does. But they don't have to go through that arrangement, those steps. But that is the world of the ComEd customer, is that they're on their own. That was the solution to high energy prices in the 90s, was let's bring competition in. Let's get the utilities out of the power plant business, bring in these retail energy suppliers and let them do their thing. So, good question.
Okay, I got a series of questions, and I wasn't able to attend the October forum, but I did listen to the whole forum. I had a work conflict, but I think
You had a day job?
I have a day job.
Oh,
yeah,
man.
Unfortunately. Couple things and themes from that forum, as well as things that I think we've all heard, that I just kind of wanted to go back over to try to get some clarification. One of them was this concept that our discussion, or maybe it was from the panel, is that we're not accounting for the technology advancements that are coming with battery storage. And can you talk a little bit about that? That wasn't part of tonight's presentation. And, one of the things I've struggled with is we know the demand is increasing and generation resources are shrinking, right? Due to regulatory changes, preferences, all those issues. And where does the battery storage component come into that in the future, whether that's 2035, 2050? If you could maybe just kind of talk a little bit about that.
Sure. And in full disclosure, I've been working with the battery storage industry on drafting a bill for Illinois.
Okay.
So, this, I'm not going to wave the flag for them. I'll just tell you what I told them, but I feel like I need to be honest that I've worked with them.
And just to be clear, I guess, and to formulate my thought, is that would take out some of the variability that we're dealing with
Right.
the renewables sector.
Yep. And that's the vision, is that if I've got too much solar in the middle of the day, it'd be better to put that into a battery and use it from 7 p.m. to 10 p.m., right? And I think that's getting closer. So the issue on batteries is the technology. You've got a lot of 2 and 4 hour battery technologies today. We're anticipating 8 and 10 and 12 hour batteries in the future. The issue, as we find a lot in the energy business, is money. The value of batteries is not at a point today at which they present a positive net economic benefit for an individual consumer. What you need are higher prices or more volatility for them to make sense. I would say if I had to give an over-under in Illinois, If you do not have an incentive, a fairly sizable incentive, the incentive we were looking at to bring 15,000 megawatts of battery storage in statewide in Illinois was somewhere in the $11.5 billion range and would extend over 20 years. So a material investment. If you don't have that, I wouldn't expect that battery deployments in Illinois would get to a critical mass until maybe 2035. If they were to adopt a policy, you may be able to get to some appreciable volumes by 2030. But just like wind and solar and all these other projects have a difficult time getting built in PJM, that 15% batting average I mentioned earlier, batteries are going to be in the same position, right? The same difficulties of getting permits, of getting interconnection agreements, putting together financing, offtake, all of that. It's something that I do believe the state should try to do because this is a real problem. And are batteries the ultimate solution? I don't know. They're the best solution that I can see on the horizon today, but if you'd asked me 2 years ago, I wouldn't have thought batteries would really be deployable. So I'm willing to be wrong on that. So the batteries are a solution. I just don't think that they cash flow.
Okay. That's helpful. So it's part of the future. How much it's part of the future probably depends on a lot of government subsidy, state or federal,
Right.
which remains uncertain. One of the other comments I hear, and I think some of the public comments reflected this, that, it's embarrassing. We don't want to be signing up to the IMEA extension because, we're signing up to being reliant on coal. One of the questions I have about this is if we are all part of a regional PJM, does it really, as I think you said, the electrons are coming from the region. So by saying we're out of the IMEA extension, there's no guarantee that we're not going to have our electrons come from other coal-fired or natural gas-fired plants in the region, right?
That's correct. You can, I didn't have any on here, but US EPA runs a data series called, it's not EPACT, it'll come to me, eGrid. And eGrid identifies different regions in the country and then gives an annual reading in terms of what are the pounds of CO2, SOx, NOx, per megawatt hour of generation in that region. And when you start taking a look at that, it's exactly what you said. You get a mix. You get a mix of the nuclear and the wind, and also coal, also natural gas, also the mixes of energy that gets imported into your system.
Right.
So one thing that's interesting about CEJA, the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, is that sets a schedule for retirement of natural gas plants in Illinois. It's interesting, when you take a look at the emissions of those natural gas plants, historically, it's lower than the emissions for imported electricity from our surrounding states. So it's analogous. It's not exactly what you're talking about, but it is analogous that different fuel blends, and they change over time, but you don't get to tag your electrons. That's why the renewable energy credits are used, right? That's your receipt. That's how you prove that, yeah, I claim ownership of that green electricity over there. It's not perfect, but it's probably the best system that we've seen so far. But I don't have the data in terms of, getting down into the weeds of what you're talking about, but the premise is true.
Yeah, I guess I think everybody at this table wants to ensure a greener future, but we also have an obligation to a sustainable, reliable energy supply, or we make the decision to get out of the energy business, as I see it, and then we just hand everything over to ComEd. But then there's no guarantee what ComEd supplies, right? They have coal-fired, gas electrification, gas-fired
They take
pipes.
whatever's scheduled into PJM.
Right.
They're out of that business as well.
Okay. And then One of the questions that I thought was interesting from the forum was when I think it was the energy trader who said that there's a 5-time increase in the 25-26 cycle. From a trading perspective, is that just within the PJM? No, wait, PJM, or is that just a ComEd exposure? And trying to understand, because I think, we know that the price of energy is going to go up with greener options and more renewables, but, what is that 7 times right here on the horizon of the 25-26 cycle? If you could go into that a little bit more.
Sure. So remember that we talk about capacity and energy.
Yeah.
And capacity is, hey, we need to pay these power plants to be available in case we need them. So it's like a reservation fee. The price for capacity is set through an auction by PJM. That auction price this year, so the auction period, the contract period, runs from June through the following May. So in the current period, from June 2024 through May 2025, the price for capacity is roughly $29 a megawatt day.
Okay.
So that means $29 times 39 megawatts times 365 days. That's the cost of capacity for your utility in PJM. It's going to $250 starting in June of 2025 through May of 2026.
So isn't IMEA part of that PJM, and won't we also see that increase? Or is that just because we have this, I guess, purchase capacity in Prairie State and we have the debt that comes off? I mean, like, how does that factor into us?
We'll see a small amount because they do market purchases, but they have member-owned capacity, Prairie State, Trimble County, Lee DeKalb Wind Farm. So they've, in essence, hedged us against the market exposure because of their ownership or purchase power agreements. So for those market purchases where they need to buy a little bit more capacity, yet we're going to see some of that will show up, but it's not the whole portfolio because they've hedged that risk. Some of that price that you're asking about, that's where, going back and correct me if I'm wrong, that's the $30 a month that ComEd customers are going to see in June. In Mark's previous slide, he said the ComEd customer is going to go up $30. A large part of that is this auction result, the capacity price rolling into the ComEd rate structure. And correct me if I'm wrong, because
No, you're doing great. Here, you can do the rest.
Oh, and is that just a one-time spike, or do we think that that's going to be the trend? I mean, I think that's the trend based on the graphs that you showed.
Yeah, I think we may have, I can send you projections. They're worth the paper they're written on. The year to year might change, but the trend is definitely on the upswing.
And then last question before I let others take over. We're struggling with this because I think, Prairie State is obviously a blemish, necessary to a certain extent. It's provided stable, reliable capacity. But on the other hand, is there anything in looking at our agreement and the proposed extension agreement, is there any opportunities to push the green transition or ways to diversify the energy mix under that extension of the contract to, because we're in this tough situation, right? Do we extend the agreement with all its issues, or, we go out and totally change and result in, which sounds like to me, pretty large utility increases to individual homeowners, unless everyone gets a Tesla wall and figures out that they're not going to use energy after sundown.
Right.
I
I think I understand. Brian, looks like you want to
well,
comment.
I think Mark touched on that. So the two pieces that are in that existing contract that are within our control is the member director resource. We can do up to 10%. It doesn't have to be in Winnetka. And the extension allows us to start now. So instead of waiting until 2035 to make a step course, the village could start something now. And the second part is renewable energy certificates. That's something that could be done now. That's, Mark touched on that as well. Now-
We're doing the Anheuser-Busch buying a credit to offset our
greenwashing.
use.
Right, so I mean, you could look at tying it to the a project that's being constructed as opposed to purchasing a rec that's done from, let's say, Texas. So you could put some, that's the direction the council wanted to look at. You can do that now under the current contract.
And those rec purchases can be impactful. You might not get as many mailings about this as some of your neighboring communities, but you may have seen about community solar or, those types of projects. Those projects are being built because Commonwealth Edison is purchasing the renewable energy credits from those resources under 20 or 15 and 20-year agreements. That provides the security necessary for the developer to secure financing, to deploy, and then build those assets. Now, I'm not saying do community solar. I'm just using that as an example that there are, go buy some Texas RECs, right? That obviously you can do that. Or you can say, let's make a longer-term purchase that then can be used to leverage up the deployment of the additionality, right, task. So that's your choice. Now, in terms of what's allowed under your contract, I defer to council and Brian. They're far more familiar with it than I.
One quick follow-up. Why couldn't IMEA do what ComEd is doing then and just accelerate the transition on community-based?
Well, I believe that they do. I believe that they have a number of wind and solar projects currently under contract. At least that was my recollection.
They just executed a contract for 150 megawatts of new solar that'll go online at the end of 2026.
Okay.
So they're doing that, but they also recognize that they need to have that capacity that Mark's been talking about, and so that comes with Prairie State, as well as some of the energies coming out of there. So, I mean, they're transitioning. It's a question of the timing of the transition versus what the village wants to participate in. But we just posted to the village website, they just executed a contract for 150 megawatts. So that'll in 2026, the portfolio goes to like 20% renewables, which is ahead of the state's portfolio, around 8% right now, renewable.
Yes, the Illinois portfolio standard, the ComEd renewableness, is 8.6% right now. It's supposed to be 23.5%, but they're a little off.
Okay, thank you.
As I was looking at your presentation and the grids up there, it seems, unless I'm not looking at this right, it seems pretty short-sighted to try and go this alone. We're the tail on the dog, and if, and as energy starts to potentially get more scarce, I think we're trying to make this decision in a period of time, which you can tell me, the biggest period of time of change as far as energy consumption with data coming up, data centers and AI, what it's going to suck out of the system in the last 50 years. So we're trying to guess this with people that are have a bigger stake in the game than we sure have to try and predict the future.
You're competing.
Yeah.
Right? You're competing for these resources. Just real quick, the hydrogen hub, the clean hydrogen hub that's proposed for Illinois, I did the math, and that one plant will take all the output of the LaSalle nuclear power plant. 2,000 megawatts, gone. That's 2,000 megawatts out of the 23,000 megawatts that are necessary to keep capacity at adequate levels in northern Illinois. And I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying that that's a big user.
And that's what concerns me is as we try and judge the future for this village, that if I do worry if we do this and try and do this, get a little too clever on this, that we're going to be in the cold, or we're going to find ourselves with extremely high cost of buying because we don't have any leverage as we would the bigger entity. The green, it's stunning to me. I mean, and even with things like wind and that's out there, I think those are coming to reality too, is how they're installed, produced, with the energy it takes to do it. They're killing whales. The farms, the wind farms in the ocean, the whales are beaching because of the noise, and there's all sorts of crazy things that I think we're learning as this is basically, as we try to expand that type of technology. So those are things that concern me. And also, a little sobering is how much additional sustainability, how much additional green you have to buy just to match. What did you say it was? How many times? 10 times or 8 times?
It'll be about 20.
20 times.
Yeah.
Just to try and match what you have. So,
Except if the reliability factor changes.
and the reliability, yeah.
Right, and that's accounting for the downward slope.
Right.
And it just means you have to get more just to
No,
stay
you're
even.
right.
Yeah.
So I think I'm just trying to, I hate to be too practical because I love the idea of trying to push the green as fast as we can, but I also know that residents will be shocked with I think potentially shocked with the increases in the cost that it's going to bring along. And even more scary than that is the reliability of not doing brownouts in California and Texas because we're trying to get there faster than we need to. Obviously, I think with IMEA, if there's a reasonable way to get to there faster, I would hope to, like you're talking about, build that into the contract. And I would think they would do the same thing. If there's a reasonable way to get to green faster, I think we obviously look for that. But to try and do some of after looking at your grid, it's pretty sobering.
Well, and I don't want to persuade or dissuade anybody from anything. That's not my job. Time and money can make any of those things work, right? I think it's a question of what type of resource investments you're willing and able to put forward. That's all. That I don't know that there's a right or a wrong. I just am thinking about effectiveness. And when we were at University of Illinois, we had a microgrid there. At IIT, we had a microgrid there. I've seen very successful wind and solar projects. I've negotiated a lot of them as well. So I'm not, down on trying to get anything done, but it is a remarkable level of effort that's necessary to operate in this market today. And
It's going to get worse.
it will, I think, become more challenging, yes.
Yeah. So that's just we're trying to find a practical solution while we go to green as fast as we can, but a practical solution to keep the future practical and a practical solution for the future of the village. That's all. So, anybody else, please?
One other question, just quickly. I think there's this, and maybe this has been disproven or maybe rebutted, but I think there's this concept that going with ComEd and maybe turning over our system to ComEd might be greener. Isn't ComEd really looking at increasing or reducing the carbon footprint associated with their energy generation, largely in the back of nuclear? Isn't that really how they're making that transition and increasing the percentage that's reducing coal-fired plants?
That's a really nuanced question. So technically,
Yeah.
ComEd is not responsible for the emissions of power plants in the region because they don't own them. They technically don't have an interest in them. Where I think they do have responsibility under state law is that they're required to purchase renewable energy credits from projects that are selected by the Illinois Power Agency and approved by the Commerce Commission. They are to have rules in place that encourage the deployment of clean energy that connects to their distribution system. So if you want to generate some clean energy, they need to facilitate that for you. or more commercial-sized projects as well. So they do have a role to play, but they don't necessarily have a direct responsibility as to what happens in that larger regional context.
Okay.
That is really supposed to occur under the PJM market structure, which uses price. You know, if you talk to someone at PJM and say, where do new power plants come from? They say, well, they come from high prices. That, you know, high price is a signal that we need more supply. And that's how their market operates, which is fine, but, you know, building a power plant is many years in the making, and you can get imbalances between supply and demand. So today's price signal might be a bit late when you've got a 10-year build that you need to put in place to address today's price spike.
But the price increase has caused, and I don't know if it's Commonwealth Edison or who owns that they're bringing online the nuclear power plant in St. Joe, I think, Michigan. And I think that's probably reflective of that price, right? Is that
Right, the Palisades.
Yeah,
Yeah,
this Palisades
yeah, exactly right.
Okay.
So that's a nuclear power plant that was going into retirement because it couldn't make any money 3 years ago. And now all of a sudden it can. It happened here locally. The Elgin Energy Center is a natural gas peaker plant, and the owner had already filed the paperwork to close it. Earlier this year, the capacity auction came out, and they withdrew their retirement. So the market does work, but I don't think it's in the context of what some of the folks around this table are thinking of is, hey, if we have a high price, is that going to bring about a lot more wind, a lot more solar, a lot more new resources? Maybe over time, if that price is high and sustained enough. In the short term, though, it's probably going to incentivize the continued operation of those mothballed or existing assets, which is not a perfect solution, but it's more of a reaction, right? It's an immediacy response from the market.
So, Mark, question, kind of getting to the root of the matter here. We have this contract. We have a commitment from IMEA to be zero carbon in 2050. Okay? They generate 970 megawatts? Is that the capacity right now of IMEA?
Oh, Miami is totally, yeah, that sounds right.
All right. In your view of the landscape, they just put on 150 megawatts of solar, then they get 38% of that credited toward capacity or something like that. So in your judgment, looking at the landscape, can IMEA get to zero carbon in 25 years, when right now they're, 80% coal or whatever, fossil fuel? And sort of a secondary part of that is, obviously, if they only had to generate capacity of 500 megawatts, because we don't know what some of the other municipalities are going to do, is that just obviously a much easier lift for them to get there? I mean, because I don't know, in just conversations with people around the table and so on, I don't know how much leverage we have in the contract negotiation with IMEA. I mean, it sounds like not a lot, Brian.
So again, 23 members have resigned, so they've hit critical mass. So the agency, whether the remaining members elect to extend or choose alternative paths, the agency exists as it's currently structured, going past 2035. So I guess that the contract was established so that everybody has the same contract terms. So in general, I'd say you have low negotiation, because if you go back, they've already hit critical mass. They exist with or without Winnetka electing to stay with IMEA as a purchasing member. If we go back and ask for some other type of arrangement, and it results in a cost shift. There's 23 other municipalities that are likely not to be willing to accept any type of change because our ask is likely going to generate a cost shift onto something that they've already accepted and said they're willing, that's what they want to sign up for.
So we make that assumption that we don't have much leverage to negotiate. How do you see their probability, their likelihood of getting to zero carbon emission in 25 years, whether it's the existing 32 members generating 970 megawatts, whatever, or half of that if a couple of these big ones don't sign up? How do you see that evolving? What do you see their opportunities in reality to get there?
And while you're answering that too, one thought was, well, let's not ante up now. Let's wait 5 years and see where it goes. If we go back, I would assume if we go back to IMEA in 5 years, saying, hey, we really want in after all, it's going to be a whole different ballgame for us if we're let in.
So why don't we let Mark take if he's
And
willing
then
to
you do that.
opine, and then I'll take the second part. And for the fairness of, in not putting Mark's on the hot seat and he can opine, that was beyond the scope of what we asked Mark to do. So I'm just in the context of the professional services that we asked Mark. So I'll let him find that line where he's comfortable talking about that, but that wasn't one of the deliverables that we asked him to provide.
Opine. That's a great word. Let me tell you what I think I know. And it doesn't have very much to do with IMEA, because I don't look at IMEA in my normal work. So let's set that aside. I might be able to comment, but let me tell you what I do know better, which is the state of Illinois and its ability to get to zero by 2050. And there is no chance that the state on its own gets there. And I say that because a number of things. One is the state has no integrated resource plan. So they don't have a method of moving forward, and you know, they set goals, but just like bumper stickers, you know, without context, it's meaningless, right? They don't have the authority to order the construction of anything. So the Commerce Commission lost the ability to order the utilities to build a wind farm, a solar farm, in the deregulation case in 1997. So and thirdly, they don't have the money. The Illinois Renewable Portfolio Standard, which is what supports a lot of these renewable energy credit purchases by the utilities, starts to run into a negative balance in 2028 and runs to a negative balance of $2 billion by 2036. This is after the state raised the RPS annual funds from $240 million a year to $580 million a year. So they don't have a plan, they don't have the authority, and they don't have the budget. So I would say that the ability of the state to meet those goals for CEJA are pretty slim. I'm not saying it's wrong that they put the goal out there. I'm just saying that they haven't set up a mechanism that acknowledges the market design and what's necessary to deliver what they say they want. So I know that's not what you're asking. So, but it might have value because that's the contra case, right? You asked me about your immediate case. I'm giving you the contra case that if not this, then that, right? So that gives you a sense. Now, to IMEA's capabilities, I haven't run their numbers, but I have tracked their power purchase agreements, and it seems that they're able to contract. I know that they acknowledge the ability of their power plant to extend its operations between 2045 are just not really great. So they will have a responsibility to go find resources, one way or the other, and I expect that in that time horizon, another coal plant probably is not very viable. I would even say under CEJA, another gas plant is not very viable. So in a sense, their boats are burning behind them as well. So they're going to have to move forward. The question is, are they going to be able to outperform the state, in its direction and authority over the investor-owned utilities? That I don't know. I mean, that's beyond my understanding.
Appreciate your honesty, and sorry to put you on the spot on that. I didn't realize, but
No.
I do think, and I'm sure we're going to get to this at the end, but I think that if we're even going to consider IMEA under their current proposal, we need a little more feet to the fire in terms of understanding how they see they're going to get there, as opposed to that circular chart they brought to us, that circled through the time frame. I think we need, if that's a viable option, to re-sign with IMEA with the commitment to be zero carbon in 2050. I think we may not be able to get it into a contract, but I think we need to understand how they plan to get there.
But I think there's a couple of pieces, and I want to come back to Trustee Apatow's question. So on that, I mean, I think there's always options to have them come and present again and ask them questions directly. A big piece of how they get there is who's in the fold from 2035 and beyond, because if the rest of those municipalities elect not to sign, it's a different process to get there than if all 32 communities re-sign.
That's what I was getting
So,
at,
I mean,
Brian. What are the, that's what I was getting at. I mean, that's a huge issue, it seems to me.
Three of the four PJM communities elect not to sign, that's a different scope than if 32 resign. And candidly, Naperville and St. Charles are the two largest.
Well, but in their
Like
contingency
probably number
planning
four.
here, they have to have those
know, right?
paths
Those paths,
planned out.
they've got a framework, which they've laid out in the sustainability plan, but that's also why they're asking who's staying on, so they can start to figure out how they're going to, as Mark alluded to, when they've acknowledged Prairie State is closing, so they're going to have resources to address that closure. But if the closure, how much capacity they need, depends on who's in beyond 2040.
I agree.
Your question about coming back later, there's a lot of unknowns in that scenario. So first of all, I'll use Naperville as an analogy. So Naperville came to IMEA in 2007 and said, we want to come back in as a purchasing member of IMEA, and then actually said, we want you to solidify that you're going to have the ability to serve our load, which is to a large extent why the agency went into Prairie State.
Yeah.
But to avoid a cost shift to the other members that had been in there, they paid a premium. So there was a calculation of a premium.
That's what I figured, yeah.
And the premium stepped down over time. But in fact, Naperville's still paying a premium now for coming late. Now, it's lower than what it was in 2008 or 9. So that would be probably the precedent that's been set if the village would come back later. So they would look at, it's probably not the same construct of what currently is being offered to the village. And it would be what has transpired between a decision to decline and when the ask is. Now, the flip side is the current contract gives IMEA the opportunity to say, at some point in time, that they could elect to say, we really don't want you to extend beyond 2035.
That's the problem. My bigger concern is if Naperville becomes the AI data center for the Midwest, there's not capacity. They may not be able to let us back in because of capacity. I didn't know if that is a real reality. It was shrinking resources or
I'd
not.
like to think, that if you came back, but I think what would be reasonable to say is there might be a premium or a cost for them to go get those resources for you. So if they've locked up, started developing, securing capacity beyond 2035, and one or more entities said, we're not going to be there, and then there's a change in position, you come back, they're in that volatile market trying to to get that, and that cost, if there is an additional cost, is going to be passed on. Because why would the other communities elect to say, we want to pay more for someone coming late?
No way.
It's a cost shift that would, and and Nick will be your board member down there. If someone came late, you wouldn't want Nick saying, oh yeah, we want Winnetka to take this additional cost on because you came back later. So I mean, it works both ways.
Actually, I kind of feel like, and we've talked about this, I kind of feel like if we knew that we could come back in, and we knew what the premium would be, not the dollar cost, but the calculation, if we actually knew that we would be accepted, that could be a viable alternative. But we don't know that they will accept us back, and we have no idea what the cost would be if they accept us back.
That's correct.
And that's a problem.
Yeah, that's a
And
problem.
if I were on their side, I wouldn't tell you.
Well,
Yeah.
well, they used to have to accept
I wouldn't
us
tell
back.
you.
Away.
But
I'm going to tell you, oh, it's okay to walk away, but if you decide to come back, this is what it's going to cost you. No way. I would wait till you come back and then say,
But at least they would, that could be, but at least they could allow us to come back.
Well, we don't even know that because of
Right now, we don't
capacity.
even know that they would take us back, right, Peter? Is that,
They have not made that commitment,
to take us back? Yeah.
I wouldn't,
unless we act before the deadline.
yeah. That's the risk. I mean, that's for managing risk for the village, that's the risk.
okay, any other questions here? Oh, okay, so go ahead, Kirk.
Page 14, Mark, in your slides. Maybe this is more of a Brian question, but it shows the projections under ComEd for future capacity shortfalls by source of energy, whether it's coal, nuclear, whatever. And Brian, I'm putting you on the spot, but I recall when IMEA presented to us, they maybe had a different way of looking at this, but in terms of future years, where our energy would come from. It would be interesting to just compare and contrast, or just to compare, where the ComEd future energy sources are relative to IMEA. And that's more of just a statement in a way, but it'd be nice to understand. When I look at the multiple options that were laid out in terms of alternative options, my very uneducated reaction is the ComEd path appears to be the lowest hanging fruit in terms of considering alternatives, but I could be totally wrong in that. And I'll just sort of back up a step and more of a, I don't know if it's a rhetorical question, but the reason we're here having this discussion is because the community's concerned about where, and rightly so, about where our energy comes from. Right? I mean, if most of our energy was coming from renewables, and there was a plan in place in the next 5-10 years that they were going to get rid of gas or whatever the non-renewables, this would probably be more of a, the negotiation with IMEA would be more of a done deal. Am I incorrect in that assumption? So when I'm sitting here asking the question, why are we here? What are we talking? It's really what, and the discussion about price and everything is only as a byproduct of where our energy is coming from. It's not because we're concerned about the price that is being proposed or whatever the deal that IMEA is offering up to us, other than that there's not a short-term or a medium-term pathway IMEA has presented to exit non-renewables. So when I think about this discussion, I think about what are the alternatives. If that really is the premise of this conversation, is we don't like where our energy is coming from. And Tina, your comments about, we can't discriminate or choose where the energy is coming from. So even if we decide to go a different route, when I turn on my lights, there's going to be some non-renewables that are creating that energy, regardless of where it's coming from. So we're damned if we do, we're damned if we don't, in a very pessimistic viewpoint. And I'm very supportive of us trying to push the opportunity or push our agenda to promote renewables and try to eliminate things that harm the environment that aren't, that we all agree, or I would assume we all agree aren't good for us and our families and the legacy we want to leave for our community. Take into consideration we're small fish in the pond. We are holdouts, but we have a voice. We have a seat at the table with IMEA. I think that there are some really cool creative opportunities that, and I'm hearing all this today, I'm like, I think we've got a pretty good deal right now. We've got a good partner with IMEA, what they provided to us, what they've represented, what they deliver to us. And I like the idea of all the ideas of trying to explore. Brian, you'd mentioned, or Mark, you had put in your presentation that we're allowed up to 10%. We can discretionarily choose where, so if we want to help promote, not that we could stop gas or coal from being, a part of our energy solution, but we can promote or try to push better alternatives over the long term. And I would encourage us to wrap our heads around, maybe come to a quick conclusion on, what horse are we going to pick, but then pick the strategy. It goes with the negotiating thing, but I just personally, I focus on how can we help change things for the good instead of running away from something I don't think we can run away from.
Right.
Getting away from coal.
Yeah, just.
So, thank you.
Okay, can I open it up for public comment? You guys
Sure.
okay? All right, I'll open the microphone up at this point to anybody who would like to speak. 3 minutes, please. Small room tonight, so just come on up and share your thoughts.
Hey everyone, I'm Brendan Andrew, 889 Willow Road. I'm a renewable energy developer for my day job. I'm also a member of the Environment and Forestry Commission here in Winnetka. So I'm not sure, seems like something to disclose. But I just wanted to kind of talk about a few things, and I think the last comment probably is mostly where I land, which is that, this presentation focused on supply options being, do we go with IMEA or do we do it on our own? And I think, or through other means, and I think that's a tough choice to make. So the question to me more is like, how can we work within the constraints of the IMEA relationship to kind of control our own destiny to the extent we can? And like, to me, and I've looked at this for the AFC, to me, I think the best option for us is to think about local behind-the-meter generation and how can we work within the confines of the existing agreement where we can procure 10% ourselves, but then the contract also says that we're allowed to, that doesn't count anything that is approved by the members of the board. And so there are other opportunities to have more local generation to the extent it doesn't shift cost. That's my read of it anyways. Shift cost to other members and it's approved by the board. And so I think we should be thinking about whether it's solar on the landfill. We've talked a little bit in the FC about, there's floating solar. We could work with we could maybe look at the lagoons. We could look at rooftop solar, aggregated battery energy storage at people's homes where we can be paid for that capacity within the contract to IMEA in the same way we're paid for the capacity from the power plant that exists today. We can aggregate local resources, sell that to IMEA, and the way I read the contract, that is allowed up to 10%, no questions asked, and potentially more than that with approval from the other members of the board. And I don't see any reason why they wouldn't, to the extent it gives IMEA an asset that they can then go sell out in the market at what might be a higher price, right? So IMEA can, if we're selling them capacity at like a fixed price within our contract, that may be lower than the PJM capacity price, so they can turn around and sell it for a profit. So there's other examples of municipalities incentivizing battery energy storage adoption in homes. We could do that to help people kind of get over the hump of deploying it. So there are lots of things we could do within the existing contract. I think we should focus our energies there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, King Poor, 735 Walden, and thank you, Mark, for in illuminating. I don't know that I understood a great percentage of it, but I think I did enough. So anyway, very helpful. And what I'm hearing from the questions from the trustees is, going it alone, that's, that may be not the way to go. ComEd, that's got its own problems. And if we go with IMEA, though, are there other things we need to know? I mean, like Bob's question, how are you going to get to the net zero by 2050? And those questions still need to be answered, I think, before this board makes a decision. And if you heard anything from that October 22nd forum, a lot of village residents are concerned about our reliance upon coal from Prairie State. And if we go with IMEA, do we have to, and if it's just like a take it or leave it, we don't do anything else, I think residents are going to be disappointed that we haven't gotten more information about how do you get there, and if it's a 25-year path, what's the first 5 years going to look like? What's the second 5 years going to look like? What are the third? How do you get there? And in terms of negotiating for the village itself, are there things that we could request that helps us chart our own sustainable destiny a little bit more or in a different way than it's set right now? It's got the 10% right now. Would there be options? And these are just ideas. In a certain number of years, we could go up to 15 or 20. Or we have an option to do that if we paid X. I mean, those are the kinds of questions I think that it would be helpful for us to explore with IMEA to help Winnetka chart its own sustainable future more than what we know. Because to me, there's unanswered questions about this contract right now, and there's data, there's information that IMEA should be able to tell us, or they should be able to tell us we don't know. And if that's the answer, we ought to know that too. So whatever the board does, I think you want to be armed with more information for our residents about how we're going to get there. I think that's why this has been a very constructive discussion tonight. But I think it also highlights the questions that still are out there and need to be answered, and the further dialogue that you can have with the IME that could be very constructive. And there may be things where, it's not that big of a cost if we, an option to go up to 15%, or, this is just me thinking out loud, but ways to see, and I'm hearing this from a number of people, how do we make this more specific to Winnetka? And there is this real need, and you heard it at the forum. We want to do more, and how can we do more with IMEA? And so I think that's something we can really press a little bit more on right now before you eventually make a decision. Thank you.
Others? Come on, you guys, just come up to the microphone.
I think I've got to say something. Hi, Patrick Hanley, 589 Lincoln. First of all, thank you all for spending all the time this evening. This has been a really productive and interesting conversation. Mark, great to have you back in the village. Thank you for your presentation. Super, super helpful and clarifying, I think, in a lot of ways. I do want to make sure that we don't let ourselves off the hook too quickly on the electrons point. I think it's a really important and an interesting point, but the way that's been described to me, and I'd love, if this is wrong, please let me know, that the electrons, the grid is a lake, and that we're all pouring different types of electrons into the lake, and then we're taking a cup out of the lake and using that to power our stuff. But we are paying somebody somewhere to pour coal into the lake. And that's an important distinction, or at least we're paying somebody to hedge around coal being poured into the lake. So we are ultimately responsible for that coal plant and for that coal. This is different than if we were paying 100% renewables, nuclear power, whatever it is, zero emission that is then going into the lake. So there's an important difference there, and it's directly connected to the idea of RECs and offsets, which is the same concept. Because if these electrons are to an extent fungible, and if we're paying somebody else to pour better electrons into that lake, that counts for something. That's worth something. And that gets to a second point that I've been thinking about throughout this whole years-long process now. I would just love to see a bit more numbers, like a bit more comparative rate numbers in terms of what the all-in cost is per kilowatt hour, whatever it is, both on the capacity side and the supply side across our different options. And that's just not something that I've seen. Maybe it could be just really difficult to pull together. It could be something that's difficult to project, but I haven't seen a clear comparison between what it would cost, in the 5-year term to stick with an IMEA contract that's predictable versus the power agency versus a go it alone at kind of an all-in cost again. Because it could well be that these are complicated options, but they are also modelable. And once you model it out, the per kilowatt hour isn't so different. And then I'd also want to see what the cost per rec is and how much recs would increase our rates relative to other options. Because it could well be that IMEA plus a rec is equal to or less than, a per kilowatt hour with ComEd. So all to say, I'd love to see a bit more comparison. Electrons are fungible, and thanks for your time.
That's a good point, Patrick. The only issue, and Rob and I were just kind of acknowledging this, that it's hard enough to project what next year is going to look like. To try to make a projection of what the energy markets are going to look like in 2035 when the new contract starts, I don't know how we get there. And I don't know any number that you would put on paper that would be credible, especially when we're projecting 12 years beyond where we are today.
It's such a good point, but if we are also projecting out that ComEd is going to be X more expensive, likely, in 10, 20 years, then there should be some sort of a way to compare. You know what I mean? If we're projecting out and saying, well, ComEd costs are rising versus what? You know what I mean? And what's the all-in? It's a good point.
Roger Hochschild, 682 Ardsley Road. Again, I want to thank all of you for your time this evening. It was very informative and great to have you back. I do think we sort of got late to the issue of sustainability, but for those of you who were there in October, I think it's clearly on a lot of residents' minds that compared to, not California, but just to the neighboring communities, we are pouring significantly more coal into the lake. And I was a little surprised, and I could be reading it wrong, that one of the benefits of staying with IMEA is continued access to low-cost power from Prairie State, which feels almost like blood money, right? Here we are, a wealthy community, and yet we're going to be proud that we get low-cost, dirty coal power. So I think finding options, being in the bind where IMEA says, well, we can't project until we know who's in, so you got to sign up and then you'll see more detailed numbers. I'm not sure is a credible answer, but finding some options for the community, or certainly even for those in the community who find it shameful that we are pouring so much coal into the lake. Thanks.
And just to clarify for the public, we're not pouring coal into Lake Michigan, okay? It's an analogy somebody used earlier in the meeting, and now it's got legs. But we are not putting anything into the lake.
Thank you for the clarification.
Ugh. Any others like to speak? Come on up.
Terry Cross, 828 Bell. I think going back to the ComEd question, you were saying, I had ComEd and I just paid a bill or whatever. One thing that I do understand, or think I understand, is that if you are with ComEd, and I'm not promoting ComEd, I know there's a lot of low viability or whatever of going there, but you have a lot more choices. You do get to sign up as a household for community solar, for this, for that, for different energy mixes. And if you choose to go greener or cleaner, and it costs more, that's your choice as a homeowner, and I really like that. So then I also thought I really appreciated your presentation, but it didn't go into our values as a community, and that kind of bothered me. have a bunch of notes here, but anyway, that was, I think, and then you also made a comment about you had no idea, or you were unable to anticipate the progress they've made toward battery storage in 2 years. Where will we be in 10? I mean, it could be great. And so my question is, it just seems so premature to be signing this contract this early. That's what I got.
Thank you. Anybody else? Sure, come on up.
I was just on that point.
Now Bob's going to get mad at me, but go
Sorry.
ahead.
Just on that point, I wanted to just kind of, I think there is a tremendous amount of uncertainty. So as a renewable energy developer, we're looking at 40-year power assets that we're installing, right? Solar power, wind is more like 30. So there's tremendous uncertainty as to what is going to happen in those intervening years, what's going to be the most economical resources even 5 or 10 years out. But I think we also need to apply that same calculus to Prairie State and to the resources within IMEA, right? If Prairie State is not an economic resource, it will not continue to be supported by IMEA, right? They're following the market. And so if there is a breakthrough in technology, I'm not necessarily promoting, I guess I am in some ways promoting the IMEA contract, but I think that, you know, those economic wins touch everybody and will move markets in the same direction. So we can say, yeah, Prairie State's going to retire in 2045, but that's if it continues to be an economic resource, and that's, you know, the latest it can possibly generate, subject to like the CEJA limits. But it may be retired earlier, and that's what's happened to coal throughout the country, is that it's been retired for economic resources, or for not economic reasons, when it's been displaced by cheaper resources. So that's still a possibility, and I think it's more the relationships within IMEA where we can determine kind of over the extension term of this contract what the future of the IMEA resource is, and the scale allows us to do that much more easily than we can as an individual community. So those points, I think, kind of convinced me to some extent that there will probably be opportunities in the future for IMEA. Sorry. Yeah.
Thanks. Okay, bring it back up here for a minute. I'm thinking maybe it would be worthwhile to have the guys from IMEA back.
Yeah.
And now that we're a little smarter,
Yeah.
you know, maybe we can start asking some harder questions.
I agree.
I'm not suggesting we negotiate at the table, because negotiating in public is just not something I'm interested in doing with anybody. But I think we can ask them a lot of hard questions and set the table for the negotiating team to go back in there and see if we can push, pull, and whatever. Something else I wanted to make everybody aware of is, you know, Brian's mentioned it, that, 31 of the members, or whatever, 23? Bottom line is 53% of the members have not ratified the contract yet. Pardon me? 53%, 54% of the voting members have not signed the contract yet. 54% of the voting, of the weighted voting members.
23 of the 32 communities have re-signed, so physical number 23 have re-signed. Trustee Dearborn, I think, was referencing the member capacity, and it's actually, with Naperville, St. Charles, and us out, it's a larger percentage that hasn't re-signed when you look at
And over
load.
2/3 have signed.
Right, so,
But the number of municipalities is like 2/3 then.
Yeah, have signed.
but on a percentage basis, there's still more than half the people are out at this point in time.
No. 23 of 31.
Capacity. Of load, right, and of weighted votes.
Correct.
So more than 50% of the weighted votes have not been signed up yet. So there still is an opportunity to have some conversations. I know, Brian, I don't like people coming back and reopening the door on negotiations, but might be a chance where we can negotiate for everybody. The other,
solar contract reflects that.
pardon me?
Well, the fact they just signed the solar contract
The-
may reflect the fact that
The signing of the solar contract was consistent with what they outlined in the
Right.
sustainability plan. And what happened in that case, just 2 seconds, was they ended up buying more solar because The deal that they were working on, I believe it was a data center, came and talked to the solar developer and said, we'll take the whole project. IMEA originally was going to take the majority of the project. And so they came back and said, if you want this project to move forward, you need to take the whole 150. If you remember in their sustainability plan, I think it was like 130. So they ran the analysis and said, we can make it work, and came back to the board and said, if we want to move this forward, we need to take the 150, because if not, the solar developer has one entity that'll take all 150.
Wow.
So this solar deal that I mentioned, that's the B House, it's on the village's website on the projects, we posted the press release, is consistent and a milestone in their sustainability plan.
Do you know what big players have not signed up yet?
Well, I mean, the ones that are,
Well, Winnetka, Naperville, and St. Charles, that's all we need. Right?
would be the big ones in PJM. Rock Falls, I believe, is already signed up.
Yeah, they're big. Oh, they have?
Yeah.
So Brian,
Peru?
Peru's out, still has not made a decision.
so that's the third.
That's even more.
They're in MISO.
Chris, to your point, I totally agree. And Brian, I mean, no disrespect to the people that came to the meeting before from IMEA, but are there people above them that you would want to have at the table here for the
So,
subsequent conversation?
The only individual that wasn't here that was higher than that was Kevin Gaden, CEO. He was out of the country.
Okay.
I think if that's a reasonable next step is to come back. I know they have some data that they've worked on, showing more detail, the next layer down in their power supply. But I think some of the steps that you're looking for, I mean, really the level of how difficult it is to get to 2050, and we'll let them tell you directly, is, again, how much are we planning for? So,
Was there a sustainability expert here? I'm trying to remember who came. Or somebody that really understands that?
Stacy Wilson was involved with led the sustainability.
Okay.
And she
Great,
was
thank
here,
you.
so I think if the council wants, that's a appropriate next step, and have them come back. There's some framing questions I think that would help too, is like, so heard the member-directed resource, so that there's probably some questions you want to clarify on what that entails, and if there's an opportunity to go beyond 10%. So I mean, that's an option, and I'm confident they've expressed the desire to come back whenever you want them back.
Good. Let's get them back. So that'll probably be February. Maybe we could even do a special session on this.
February would work.
You know, I mean, that'll give us a little more time flexibility and not try to jam it into an agenda line that is pretty well filled up for the next several months, so.
Well, one question I had, Chris, and we talk about ComEd, and I have this gut feeling instinct that I value the distribution system we have at a very high level. I think there are certain things that set Winnetka apart, and that's one of them. And I don't really quite understand, and maybe this, Nick, maybe you could explain this through a memo or something like this. You know, we give up our transmission lines, our distribution lines. I don't even know what that means. I mean, now we become a Me Too ComEd customer, and we lose that distinction of Winnetka power goes out, Winnetka power comes on. And that, to me, is incredibly valuable, and I don't even know how to put a value on that. I mean, to go to ComEd and just say, you're going to their mix of supply and all this stuff, it doesn't even address this issue that is so valuable here.
Yes.
So I'd like to learn more about that.
So when Mark was asked to come and prepare this material, we said, focus, the ComEd component is really the supply, because that was the discussion, but he did, and appropriately so, we asked him to note, you're moving the distribution assets over. We could probably have a whole night of discussion on it, but simplistically, so first of all, again, you're going to have to revisit, ComEd does still put stuff while subdivision's going underground. Overhead is still an acceptable approach for serving customers. So you're going to have a discussion about the design of facilities, and undergrounding is not the least cost. So there'd have to be some probably facilities like a rider that would be on your rate that would be to account for the additional costs if we were going to keep the all underground. To your point about you have dedicated linemen and operating staff that respond only to Winnetka. Now you're a member of the shore, and so when there's outages, they prioritize outages by, like, say, getting the most customers back quickly, and that'll be at the North Shore level or the geographic area level, and then they'll work from the most customers down to the least. So depending on the types of outages, you'll fall into their prioritization system, as opposed to the linemen now, they're only dispatched to Winnetka outages. The intangible things that go a lot unnoticed but happened, hanging decorations, Music Fest, any of those intangible things, those go away. You know, ComEd's not gonna, you're gonna have to figure out a way to do the decorations. And while that's small, those are all things that you're gonna have to find. The biggest thing is you're in control. So, right, you know, previously when I was the director, now Nicholas, if there's an outage problem, you know the person that's responsible to take care of it for you. You set the policy direction, you provide the financial resources to make it happen. ComEd's the investor-owned utilities for profit. Their prioritization is not going to be the same as what you're prioritizing. You're going to have a governmental affairs contact that, you know, Rob's going to call and rant at if there's a problem, and then you call him in here and put them to the map. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you don't have control over ComEd.
But we give up our transmission. I mean.
You'll give up, you'd have.
What does that mean, we give it up? Do they
You're gonna,
pay us for it?
you're going to negotiate, and it's unclear to me if you would transfer it, or you would sell it, or if you'd have to pay them. So your physical assets, the cables in the street, all those transformers, the overhead pad mounts, there's going to be some discussion, they have to take over the ownership of those assets.
Understood. So
Whether they would pay for that, or pay you for that, or whether you'd have to pay them something to take it over, there's going to be, for example, at the technical level, telemetry, that you heard me talk about SCADA, supervisory control and data acquisition. All our substations would have to be integrated into their system. There's a cost to do that.
For sure. Well, Brian, again, I mean, this is just I come in with this baggage of overvaluing our distribution system because I think it's so incredibly important as a resident here.
I agree. I think
and so without understanding what that means, I don't even see how we can even think about ComEd.
Yeah, there's certain things that make this village special, and that type of service
understanding
people
that. I mean,
expect.
Well, and it's,
The only way you understand it, though, Bob, is you sit down and negotiate, and then you know what they're willing to do.
but you're talking about level of service. And I think that's, I mean, you know,
I mean, you pick up the phone.
when I lived in Wilmette and I was out of power for 10 days.
Yeah, how's that feel?
In the middle of summer, it was horrible.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I
think the
That's a lot
reliability
to that.
is,
the reliability and the ability to have dedicated employees who address those issues, or, you know, if there's a fire or something, and that there's coordination with the fire department and our electrical linemen. I mean, that's a level of service that isn't intangible.
It separates the village
Yeah.
from others.
The other thing we hear is like when we're dealing with, we're dealing with the stormwater project team and providing electric service. So the Mayos, the Strands, the Burgers, and even the one Winnetka staff, where they're talking about electric service, like the opportunity and the interaction they have with they're like, oh my God, this is so much easier than dealing with another entity that's an investor-owned utility. So, I mean, it's local, it's local service, even on the design and the engineering end. So they know who to call. It's Nick and his staff. We're responsive. I mean, the stuff that's happened with the stormwater project, and yes, it's a village project, so you'd expect that, but getting electric service in or changes that had to be made, Nick, Jim, myself would sit down with Strand and we'd work through it and say, yeah, we can provide this as part of the utilities service to the village. If you go to ComEd, that's a different level of discussion.
Any more questions? It's past 9.
I have a question. If it's our asset, why would we have to sell it to them? Why can't they rent it from us? Like, if you can own the towers, you know, and then the cell phone companies have to pay you for that tower. So
Yeah, we just don't know, Terry. That's, we just don't know.
It's an option that I haven't heard discussed.
So, any other questions? All right. No. Oh, yeah, that I can do. May I have a motion to adjourn?
Yes. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We stand adjourned.
Thank